Hi everyone, welcome to the War Connoisseur. Hope you enjoyed today's video and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.
My War Memories, 1914 to 1918. Most of his success at Gumbinnen and advance quickly, my plan would be unthinkable. Then there would be no alternative but to withdraw the ISTRC and the 17th AC in a more southwesterly direction towards Wormditt, while the other part of the 8th Army held up the Naro Army and prepared to check it, if occasion served. The idea of a stiff defence of some line east of the Vistula, if necessary, also entered into our calculations. We discovered by degrees that Rennenkampf was advancing only slowly. The two army corps could therefore be gradually deflected in their retirement through the Bartenstein-Gerdauen line, in a sharp southerly direction to Bischofsburg-Neidenburg. Next, the 17th AC, protected by the Ist Cavalry Division and the Ist RC, was moved south via Schippenbeil to Bischofstein. As soon as it had passed behind the Ist RC, and on the 26th advanced from Bischofstein to Bischofsburg, the Ist Army Corps itself moved, south of Schippenbeil, in the direction of Seeburg. Only the Ist Cav. Division remained, facing Rennenkampf, near and to the south of Schippenbeil. Of this division, also on the 26th, the Ist Cavalry Brigade received the order to draw out via Rossell on Sensburg. Accordingly, from the 27th of August onwards, only two cavalry brigades stood between Lake Mauer and the River Pregel, facing 24 very strong infantry and several cavalry divisions of Rennenkampf's. The defensive chain of lakes was thus open on the west, and in any case it would have been quite easy to turn it and completely isolate Königsberg. Our decision to give battle arose out of the slowness of the Russian command and was justified by the necessity of winning in spite of inferiority in numbers. It was nonetheless one of tremendous gravity. On this line the two corps were marching in the rear of the Naro army from Neidenburg to Allenstein. In this way they exposed their rear without adequate protection to Rennenkampf's army, which was only 2 or 3 days' march away. When the battle began in real earnest on the 27th and, in contrast to previous wars, was not finished in one day but continued until Tannenberg the 30th, Rennenkampf's formidable host hung like a threatening thundercloud to the northeast. He need only have closed with us, and we should have been beaten. But Rennenkampf brought his main body hardly beyond the Allenburg-Gerdauen-Neidenburg line, and we had time to win a brilliant victory. Few knew the anxiety with which I watched the Niemann army during those long days. In order to allow the 17th AC and the 1st RC to make their full striking power felt, the other groups of the 8th Army had of course to attack, and whatever happened they had not to let themselves be beaten. The reinforced 20th AC had passed through difficult and exhausting days. On the 23rd it stood, facing south, on the heights northeast of Gilgenberg, while the enemy was approaching from Neidenburg, that is from the southeast. The 3rd Reserve Division was still assembling west of Hohenstein. The 1st RC had just begun to detrain near Deutsch-Eylau. General von Scholz was successful in beating off superior enemy forces, but whilst holding the heights east of Gilgenberg, he was obliged to withdraw his left flank sharply west of Hohenstein, about as far as Mechlin. Although uncomfortable for the troops, this movement had its good points, for the Russians thought they had won. They did not believe in any further German resistance, still less in a German attack. They saw the road open into German territory east of the Vistula. On the 24th, we got into touch with General von Scholz and actually met him at Tannenberg. He and his Chief of Staff, Colonel Hell, were to distinguish themselves in the course of the war and leave their names to history. General von Scholz gave us a lucid account of the great achievements of the troops under his command since the beginning of the campaign and the great difficulties encountered in the last battles. He was of opinion that the enemy would attack him again, but that he would be able to stand fast. On the journey from Marienburg to Tannenberg, an intercepted enemy wireless message was given us which gave a clear idea of our opponent's dispositions for the next few days. The Naro army was advancing, its left wing in echelon, its 6th Corps directed via Ortelsburg on Bischofsburg, which was reached or passed by the 26th, and its 13th Corps directed from Neidenburg through Passenheim on Allenstein. The 15th and 18th Corps, with which General von Scholtz had been engaged during these days, was following. On the 26th, the most southerly echelon was to be found somewhere near Waplitz. Still further back to the left and pushing west, the 1st Corps, covered by several cavalry divisions, was moving through Mlawa and Soldau against Lautenburg and Strasbourg. It was a question of breaking up this movement of the enemy by an attack from the west with the southern group of the 8th Army. It was a great temptation to attack simultaneously south of Soldau in order to surround the 1st Russian Corps as well. The defeat of the Narew Army, in conjunction with the advance of the 17th AC and the 1st RC, could thus have been absolutely annihilating, but the forces at my disposal were insufficient. So I proposed to General von Hindenburg that an attack be made in the direction of Ustau by the 1st AC on the line Deutsch-Eylau-Montovo, and by the right wing of the reinforced 20th AC from the direction of Gilgenburg, so as to throw back the Russian 1st Corps to the south, beyond Soldau. Then our 1st AC was to break through in the direction of Neidenburg, in conjunction with the 1st and 17th AC and 1st RC, in order to surround at least the main body of the Narew Army. We had to confine ourselves to this plain, if we wished to succeed. The attack by the 1st and 20th AC had to be postponed to the 27th, though I should have been glad to see it begin earlier. But the 1st AC was not yet ready, the condition of the railways in East Prussia being far from good. General von François, commanding the 1st AC, quite rightly insisted on concentrating the whole of his corps before attacking. But matters did not develop as smoothly as would appear from this short sketch. All the troops were exceedingly exhausted, and strengths had been reduced by continual fighting. Many difficulties were met with in the transmission of orders to the 1st RC and the 17th AC. Enemy cavalry patrols rendered that zone unsafe. It was doubtful whether the enemy would give us time to carry out our plans. But the greatest difficulties were due to the refugees, numbering many thousands, some on foot and some in vehicles, who blocked the roads behind von Scholtz's group. They hung on to the troops, and a sudden retreat on the part of this army group would have had the most distressing consequences, both for refugees and soldiers. But it could not be avoided, for the few gendarmes were not sufficient to take charge of such masses. We could do nothing for them. The memory of the many sad sights I then saw haunts me still. On the 24th and 25th of August, our headquarters were at Rosenberg, and on the 26th at Lobau. We took advantage of these last 2 days to get into touch with commanders and troops in various parts. On the evening of the 26th, the positions of both sides were somewhat as follows. General von Michelmann, who had the 1st AC under his orders, was in Lautenburg and Strasbourg, with portions of the garrisons of the Vistula fortresses, in close touch with enemy cavalry. The 1st AC itself had been concentrated to the south of Montovo, and had fought its way as far as Ustau, which was strongly held by the Russian 1st Corps. General von François was ready to continue his advance on the 27th. To the right wing of the reinforced 20th AC had been allotted the task of attacking Ustau from the north and then joining hands with the 1st Army Corps in its later advance upon Neidenburg. The 41st Infantry Division was to march upon Waplitz from Grossgardienen, while on their left a Landwehr brigade. The 3rd Reserve Division and the 37th Infantry Division were simultaneously to attack Waplitz and Hohenstein on a line running north from Milan. The enemy had pushed forward on the whole front and occupied Allenstein. Von der Goltz's Landwehr Division, which had been placed at our disposal by our general headquarters, was coming up near Osterode and Biersellen. This division came from Schleswig-Holstein, where up to now it had been employed in guarding the canal and the coast. It was to take Hohenstein from the northwest. The I.Est Reserve Corps reached the neighbourhood of Seeburg on the 26th. The 17th AC had been engaged with a division of the Russian 6th Corps between Lautern and Gangterbosso, north of Bischofsburg, and had driven it back in the direction of Bischofsburg. The 6th Landwehr Brigade, which had advanced on the 24th and 25th from Lotzen to the northwest of Bischofsburg, had taken a successful part in the action. The attack on Ustau was to begin at 4 a.m. on the 27th. We wanted to be present at this decisive point in order to be able to superintend on the spot the cooperation of the 1st and 20th AC, orders for which had already been given. Just as we left Lobau for Gilgenburg, the joyous news reached us that Ustau had fallen. I considered the battle won. However, we had not got that far yet. Soon after, it transpired that Ustau had not yet been taken, and it only fell late in the afternoon. From a tactical point of view, the narrow army was now broken through. The East AC threw the enemy back beyond Soldau and marched upon Neidenburg. The Ist Reserve Corps reached the neighbourhood of Seeburg on the 26th. The 17th AC had been engaged with a division of the Russian 6th Corps between Lautern and Gangterbosso, north of Bischofsburg, and had driven it back in the direction of Bischofsburg. The 6th Landwehr Brigade, which had advanced on the 24th and 25th from Lotzen to the northwest of Bischofsburg, had taken a successful part in the action. The attack on Ustau was to begin at 4 a.m. on the 27th. We wanted to be present at this decisive point in order to be able to superintend on the spot the cooperation of the 1st and 20th AC, orders for which had already been given. Just as we left Lobau for Gilgenburg, the joyous news reached us that Ustau had fallen. I considered the battle won. However, we had not got that far yet. Soon after, it transpired that Ustau had not yet been taken, and it only fell late in the afternoon. From a tactical point of view, the narrow army was now broken through. The East AC threw the enemy back beyond Soldau and marched upon Neidenburg. The 20th AC, greatly exhausted as it was not so successful, and the 41st Infantry Division near Grotte Gardienen made no progress. Nor was any ground won further north. Von der Goltz's Landwehr Division closed in on Hohenstein. We returned to Lobau in the afternoon, not altogether satisfied. On our arrival, news came through that the Ist AC had been routed and that the relics of this corps were arriving in Montowo. Such news was difficult to believe. A telephone inquiry to the railway commandant there elucidated the fact that troops of the Ist Army Corps were collecting at that point, but later on it appeared that it was a question of only one battalion that had found itself in a very tight corner and given way. Another rather alarming discovery was a number of supply columns hurriedly retreating through Lobau. A general has much to bear and needs strong nerves. The civilian is too inclined to think that war is only like the working out of an arithmetical problem with given numbers. It is anything but that. On both sides, it is a case of wrestling with powerful, unknown physical and psychological forces, a struggle which inferiority in numbers makes all the more difficult. It means working with men of varying force of character and with their own views. The only quantity that is known and constant is the will of the leader. All those who criticize the dispositions of a general ought first to study military history, unless they have themselves taken part in a war in a position of command. I should like to see such people compelled to conduct a battle themselves. They would be overwhelmed by the greatness of their task, and when they realize the obscurity of the position and the exacting nature of the enormous demands made on them, they would doubtless be more modest. Only the head of the government, the statesman who has decided for war, and that with a clear conscience, shoulders the same or a bigger burden of responsibility than that of the commander-in-chief. In his case, it is a question of one great decision only, but the commander of an army is faced with decisions daily and hourly. He is continuously responsible for the welfare of many hundred thousands of persons, even of nations. For a soldier there is nothing greater, but at the same time more overwhelming, than to find himself at the head of an army or the entire field army of his country. Late at night we received news in Lobau that the Est RC had reached Wartenburg. The Russian 6th Corps was in full retreat before the 17th Army Corps beyond Ortelsburg and was again defeated south of Bischofsburg. Smaller forces were sent in pursuit, while the main body of the 17th AC bivouacked at and to the north of Mensguth on the evening of the 27th. Nothing remained to be done on the 28th but to give orders for the Ist AC to occupy Neidenburg. In the meantime, the corps had already made a turning movement in that direction. The 20th Army Corps was to carry out the attack which had been fixed for the 27th, and more especially to push forward the 41st Infantry Division. Von der Goltz's Landwehr Division was to attack Hohenstein. The IST RC and the 17th AC were moved up west, covered against attack from Ortelsburg, to positions on a line running from Allenstein to Passenheim. Early on the 28th, we went to Froggenau and took up station in the open at the eastern end of the village. General von Scholz was not far off. A very ineffective field telephone connected us with the 1st AC, but no communication at all was possible with the other forces. Our first impressions were by no means favourable. Neidenburg had certainly been taken, but the 41st Infantry Division had attacked Waplitz in a fog and been driven back. This division, which had suffered heavy casualties, was now holding positions west of Waplitz and anticipating a hostile counter-attack with the greatest anxiety. I sent an officer there by car to give me a report on the condition of the division, and his account was not encouraging. The Landwehr near Moulins were not making progress. If the enemy attacked the right wing of the 20th AC in great force, a grave crisis might result. At the best, the battle would be prolonged. Finally, Rennenkampf might march. But the enemy made no attack on the 41st Infantry Division, and the Niemann Army did not march. Captain Bartenwerfer, of the staff of the 17th AC, flew over the enemy lines and brought good reports of the progress of his corps in the enemy's rear. During the afternoon, the situation changed to our advantage. The 3rd Reserve Division, and later the 37th Infantry Division, gained ground west of Hohenstein, von der Goltz's Landwehr. Division entered Hohenstein itself. The enemy front appeared to be wavering. General von Hindenburg wanted to drive on to Meuchelen. We ran right into a temporary panic, created by Russian prisoners who were being taken to the rear in large numbers. This incident created an unfavourable impression, as the disorder spread far to the rear. In the evening we went to Osterode. Owing to an unfortunate mobilization order, the civil authorities had already left the town. This must have considerably increased the anxiety of the civil population. We were not at all clear as to how things stood with the individual units. But there was no doubt that the battle was won. Whether it would prove a real Cannae was still uncertain. The Ist AC had to send a detachment to Willenberg, whither the 17th AC was also to proceed. The retreat of the Russians was to be cut off. During the night we learnt further details. The Russian 13th Corps had advanced from Allenstein on Hohenstein and had pressed the Landwehr severely. The IST RC had come down southwest of Allenstein. Its further advance would close the ring round the Russian 13th Corps and thus conclude the whole operation, whilst the IST and 17th ACs cut off the retreat of the other portions. On the morning of the 29th, I decided to go to Hohenstein to try and disentangle the congestion caused by the troops getting mixed up. Operations against Rennenkampf's army were to be initiated, whether he advanced or remained where he was. Still another incident occurred before we were certain of victory. Early on the 29th, we received a message by aeroplane that a hostile army corps was marching on Neidenburg from the south and was nearing the town. It was therefore threatening the rear of the IST AC, which, with its front facing north, was engaging Russian troops in retreat. At the same moment we were called up from Neidenburg and informed that hostile shrapnel was falling on the town. Then we were cut off. All available troops were set marching in the direction of Neidenburg to support the Ist AC in the engagement we anticipated. But General von François had saved himself already by his own energy, and the enemy displayed more hesitation than the situa. Tyon justified. After giving these orders, I set out for Hohenstein, and on the way went over the battlefield, which made a deep impression on me. East of Hohenstein, our own columns were getting entangled with masses of Russian prisoners. It was no easy task to restore order. The 1st RC and the 20th AC were drawn up along the road from Allenstein to Hohenstein, and the Army Command had thus again at least 2 corps at its disposal. The battle was drawing to a conclusion. The 3rd Reserve Division had broken through the enemy lines and reached Mooschachen, east of Neidenburg. The Russians, retiring through the thick woods, tried to break through the German ring at several points. At Mooschachen, in particular, very heavy fighting took place on the 30th, but without in any way influencing the issue of the battle. General Samsonov shot himself and was buried near Willenberg without being recognized. His widow, who was in Germany in connection with matters concerning prisoners of war, was able to trace his grave by a locket which had been taken for identify. Katian purposes from the body of the fallen general when he was buried. The Russian generals who were taken prisoner arrived at Oster Road and reported to General von Hindenburg. The number of prisoners taken and the amount of booty captured are already well known. The enemy losses in killed and wounded, too, were extremely heavy. The widely circulated report that thousands of Russians were driven into the marshes and there perished is a myth. No marsh was to be found anywhere near. One of the most brilliant battles in the history of the world had been fought. It had been the achievement of troops which had been fighting for weeks, sometimes unsuccessfully. To the training of our army in peacetime alone did we owe this feat. The battle was a glorious triumph for the generals and their troops, indeed, for every officer and man, and the whole country. Germany and Austria-Hungary rejoiced. The world was silent. At my suggestion, the battle was named the Battle of Tannenberg, in memory of that other battle long ago in which the Teutonic Knights succumbed to united Lithuanian and Polish hosts. Will any German now, as then, suffer the Lett, and more especially the Pole, to take advantage of our misfortune to do us violence? Are centuries of old German culture to be lost? I could not rejoice wholeheartedly at our mighty victory, for the strain imposed on my nerves by the uncertainty about Rennenkampf's army had been too great. All the same, we were proud of this battle. The victory had been brought about by A57. Breakthrough, an encircling movement, firm resolution to win and intelligent limitation of aims. Despite our inferiority on the Eastern Front, we had succeeded in assembling on the battlefield a force nearly as strong as that of the foe. I thought of General Count von Schlieffen and thanked him for his teaching. In the Protestant church at Allenstein, General von Hinden. Berg and I rendered thanks to Almighty God for this victory. I had not a moment to spare for relaxation. I had to work out the regrouping of the army for further operations. It was an uncommonly difficult task simultaneously to finish one battle and make plans for the next. Innumerable other matters had to be attended to between whiles. One urgent matter was the removal of the prisoners. Having regard to the uncertainty of the situation, their number was a heavy burden in itself. I was decorated with the Iron Cross, 2nd class, of which I was exceedingly proud. Even now, when I think of Liège and Tannenberg, my heart swells with pardonable satisfaction. The value of the Iron Cross, 2nd class, dwindled in the course of the war. That is quite natural, although regrettable. But the order should be worn with pride by anyone who has honourably won it. On the Western Front, the victorious progress of the German arms was still unchecked. Accordingly, General Headquarters considered that they could reinforce the 8th Army with 3 army corps from the west. The telegram announcing the proposed reinforcements arrived just at the commencement of the Battle of Tannenberg. Later, I was asked whether 1 army corps could be retained in the west, and as I had not asked for reinforcements, I assented. So only 2 army corps arrived, the Guard Reserve Corps, the 10th Corps, and the 8th Cavalry Division. The decision to weaken the forces on the Western Front was premature, but of course we in the East could not know that, for the reports from the West were favourable. But it was particularly breakthrough, an encircling movement, firm resolution to win, and intelligent limitation of aims. Despite our inferiority on the Eastern Front, we had succeeded in assembling on the battlefield a force nearly as strong as that of the foe. I thought of General Count von Schlieffen and thanked him for his teaching. In the Protestant church at Allenstein, General von Hinden. Berg and I rendered thanks to Almighty God for this victory. I had not a moment to spare for relaxation. I had to work out the regrouping of the army for further operations. It was an uncommonly difficult task simultaneously to finish one battle and make plans for the next. Innumerable other matters had to be attended to between whiles. One urgent matter was the removal of the prisoners. Having regard to the uncertainty of the situation, their number was a heavy burden in itself. I was decorated with the Iron Cross, 2nd class, of which I was exceedingly proud. Even now, when I think of Liège and Tannenberg, my heart swells with pardonable satisfaction. The value of the Iron Cross 2nd class dwindled in the course of the war. That is quite natural, although regrettable. But the order should be worn with pride by anyone who has honourably won it. On the Western Front, the victorious progress of the German arms was still unchecked. Accordingly, General Headquarters considered that they could reinforce the 8th Army with 3 army corps from the west. The telegram announcing the proposed reinforcements arrived just at the commencement of the Battle of Tannenberg. Later, I was asked whether 1 army corps could be retained in the west, and as I had not asked for reinforcements, I assented. So only 2 army corps arrived, the Guard Reserve Corps, the 10th Corps, and the 8th Cavalry Division. The decision to weaken the forces on the Western Front was premature, but of course we in the East could not know that, for the reports from the West were favourable. But it was particularly fateful that the reinforcements destined for the Eastern Front were drawn from the right wing, which was fighting for a decision, instead of from the left wing, which was stronger than was necessary after the battle in Lorraine had been fought. The corps which was to have been the 3rd for the Eastern Front was left in Lorraine. The situation in Galicia had already become threatening. The Russian main forces had hurled themselves on the Austro-Hungarian armies and beaten them east of Lemberg at the end of August. The Austrian army was not, at the beginning of the war, a first-class fighting instrument. Had we really entertained aggressive intentions before the war, we should have insisted on Austria-Hungary's improving her armaments. Her railway communications, which were totally inadequate, would also have been extended. Our neglect in that respect was, in any case, a great mistake. The Triple Alliance was only a political union, while the Franco-Russian alliance was of a definitely military character, and this constituted a great advantage to our enemies. Even our arrangements with Austria-Hungary in the event of a joint war were of the poorest. General Count von Schlieffen always feared a breach of faith, which indeed actually occurred. A scheme of mutual operations existed only in the roughest outlines. The deployment of the Austro-Hungarian armies on the further side of the River San was justified only if they felt themselves superior to the Russian army without outside help, as many Austro-Hungarian officers believed, or if we could cross the River Naro simultaneously with strong forces. But this we were not in a position to do, as the last army bill had not granted us the 3 extra army corps for which the General Staff had hoped. Further, we now had also to make up on the Western Front for Italy's defection. According to former military agreements with Italy, 3 Italian corps and 2 cavalry divisions were to deploy in Alsace, whilst the main body of the army, minus the coast defence forces, were to be assembled on the Franco-Italian frontier. Simultaneously, the fleet was to endeavour to cut France 59 off from her colonies in North Africa. These arrangements were in force for some time, but subsequently lapsed. Then, at the express wish of General Pollio, chief of the Italian General Staff, these plans were once more worked at. General Pollio died in the summer of 1914, shortly before the outbreak of war. There was not the least necessity for France to leave even a single soldier on her south-east frontier. She could employ every soldier against us, for she knew perfectly well that Italy would not come into the war on our side. Our former ally thus did us untold harm. Her attitude towards England was not to be misunderstood. Animosity certainly existed between Italy and Austria-Hungary, but although this was of long standing, it did not prevent Italy entering into an alliance with us and Austria-Hungary. This alliance brought Italy many advantages, and we naturally expected that she would feel under an obligation to us. A healthy national egoism is easy to understand and exists in every nation. But there are certain ethical laws which must not be violated, and that is precisely what Italy did. So she cannot complain of the adverse criticism we levelled at her during the 4 years of war. The critical position of the Austro-Hungarian army at the end of August, opposed by greatly superior Russian forces, was not to be misunderstood. General von Conrad, chief of the Austrian General Staff, insisted, quite properly from his point of view, that we should cross the river Narev. But seeing that the 8th Army was still inferior in numbers to that of General Rennenkampf, it was impossible to accede to this request. An advance in the direction of Mlawa-Pultusk could at any time be stopped by the advance of General Rennenkampf towards the Allenstein-Elbing line. There was, therefore, no alternative but to deal first with the Russian Niemann army. Still under the influence of the Battle of Tannenberg, Rennenkampf had apparently withdrawn his advanced units several kilometres, but he seemed to intend a stand between the River Pregel and Lake Mauer. The 8th Army was compelled to fight a second battle, and had to use all its available strength. In the execution of this plan, the reinforcements from the west were detrained on the Allenstein-Elbing line, and the 8th Army was concentrated ready to advance between the Willenberg and Allenstein front. Only small forces were left behind for the defence of the frontier near Soldau. They were to advance into Poland in the direction of Mlawa. As soon as the troops had been deployed, we intended to attack Rennenkampf on a wide front between the River Pregel and Lake Mauer, while enveloping his left wing beyond Lotzen and further south. The task delegated to our outermost southern wing was to guard the army from attack from Augustovo and Osowiec, where we expected hostile forces to detrain. The concentrated 8th Army was to fight in 3 groups, from the River Pregel to Lake Mauer, east of Lotzen and in the direction of Lich. At the beginning of September, the following units were ready to advance: the garrisons of the Vistula fortresses, near Soldau, von der Goltz Landwehr Division, near Neidenburg, 3rd Regier Div, and 1st AC, near Willenberg, Ortelsburg, 1st Cavalry Brigade west of Johannisberg, 17th AC, Passenheim, 20th, Mith AC, and 1st RC. In and on both sides of Allenstein, Guard RC. Coming up from Elbing towards the lower course of the river, Passage, 8th Cavalier Div, advancing in the direction of Lotzen, the 1st Cavalier. Div -1 Cavalry Brigade was still occupying its positions facing the Niemann Army. It was also to advance via Lotzen, the main Königsberg Reserve, holding the line of the Dame. The main Posen Reserve and Count von Bredow's Landwehr Division were being brought up, but did not arrive in time for the battle. The supply columns and trains of the East RC and the 27th AC, which were behind the river Passage when the forward movement started, had to carry out some difficult movements, but finally succeeded in reaching their concentration area without too much friction. Some Russian cavalry, before which our East Cavalry Division had to give way, had temporarily penetrated west even as far as the Passage below Wurmdit, without doing any military damage, however. Strange to say, they had not even destroyed the main railway line from Elbing to Königsberg. It was naturally of the utmost importance to us to get our railways into working order again, especially those we had had to destroy ourselves during our retreat from Gumbinen. This was particularly essential in regard to the station of Korschen. This station ought to have been thoroughly demolished, but within 48 hours of our recovering possession it could be utilised again. It was lucky for us that the work of destruction had not been carried out as thoroughly as I had expected. The troops as yet were not sufficiently experienced. It was plain that special technical instruction was needed. I made a mental note of this for future occasions. The advance against Rennenkampf's army began on the 4th of September. On the 7th, the Guard RC, the IST RC, the NTA, and 20th AC entrenched a position in front of the enemy lines at Wehlau-Gerdaun-Nordenburg-Angerburg, between the River Pregel and Lake Mauer, and attacked during the following days according to plan. The engagements, particularly those of the 20th Army Corps, did not go well for us. The Russians made a powerful counterattack. The enemy positions were strong and cleverly constructed, and we should never have got the upper hand of them with the arms and ammunition at our disposal, had it not been that the projected enveloping move, meant near Lotzen and the fortified chain of lakes, was beginning to have its effect. Even east of Lotzen, which had held out bravely against enemy attacks all this time, things did not look promising. The 17th AC and the 1st and 8th Cavalry Divisions, which had advanced from the fortress, only made slow progress northeast of the lakes on the 8th and 9th of September. They had some very hard fighting round Kruglauken and Possessern. The 1st AC, which had pressed forward from Nikolaiken and Johannisberg, had to be deflected sharply north from the east side of the lake line. By this movement it secured more room for the 17th AC by the evening of the 9th. The 3rd Res, Divi, with von der Goltz's Landwehr Div behind it, was still advancing in the Biala-Lik direction. On September 3rd it had already encountered the enemy in very superior force near Biala. This operation also was extraordinarily daring. To begin with, the Russian Niemann Army, with its 24 infantry divisions, was very much stronger than the 8th Army, with its 15 to 16 divisions. Moreover, the Russian divisions consisted of 16 battalions, and ours, at that time, of 12. The Russian fighting strength was further increased by from 4 to 6 divisions, which were being assembled round Ossowiec and Augustovo. This immense superiority could be concentrated against us at any moment and at any chosen point. Our right wing, in particular, was in danger to the east of the lakes. It might be overwhelmed. Even in such a situation as this, we did not hesitate for a moment to venture on a battle. Our superior training was in our favour. Tannenberg had given us a great advantage. The Army Command would have liked the right wing to have been stronger, and a division of the 20th AC west of the lakes had been kept ready to be placed at our disposal, but this division had to be returned to the Corps. The front of 50 kilometres, on which the 4 corps attacked the enemy, was certainly very long. Further, the staff of the Guard Reserve Corps, fearing a Russian attack, had therefore concentrated its units. The north wing had to stand firm on the Pregel, otherwise the 8th Army might be outflanked there. The attack of the Envelope-Ing wing must not be stronger than we had allowed for. We had to wait and see whether our main attack would succeed or fail. Hard fighting would be the decisive factor here. We could only do everything in our power to secure the success at which we aimed. On the morning of September, we received the decisive news that during the night the enemy had evacuated his position facing the Ist RC north of Gerdauen, probably in consequence of the continuous attacks of the Ist and 27th AC. It was said that the Corps had occupied their position and intended to march on. The rejoicing at headquarters can be imagined. A great success had once more been achieved, but still nothing decisive. The Russian army was not yet beaten by any means. Northeast of Lotzen we had only had local successes. It was important to carry out a frontal attack with all our strength and throw ourselves on the receding enemy whilst the enveloping wing advanced east of Rominton Woods towards the Weir-Ballen-Kovno road. In this way we intended to drive the Russians as far as possible towards the Niemen. It had also to be taken into account that Rennenkampf, who was now cooperating with the reinforcements arriving further south, would be able to make a vigorous attack in any direction. Our lines were very thin everywhere, though the 2 northern groups, which had hitherto been separated by Lake Mauer, had joined up again. The situation was still extremely critical, and the tension was great. The troops had a fresh task before them. Keeping in close touch with each other, they had to pursue the enemy unceasingly by forced marches and attack him whenever he made a stand. At the same time, they had to wait for the cooperation of Ney. barring columns before making local enveloping movements so as to minimize losses. The 17th AC, and more particularly the Ist AC on the extreme right, and the Ist and 8th Cavalry Divisions, had to strike again and again. The marching orders for the different sections, beginning at the left, were roughly as follows: Königsberg, Main Reserve; Königsberg, Tilsit. That's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Stay tuned.